Okay, I think we're started. So we're happy to have Parijat Dey, who's currently at Uppsala University, giving the first low energy talk on high energy physics, and she's going to tell us about constraining conformal field theories.
Thank you. So first, I would like to thank the organizers for organizing this wonderful meeting. It's a great pleasure to give my first talk here. So I'll be talking about constraining conformal field theories, which is okay. Before I start, I have a question. Is there a pointer kind of thing? Like if I want to point some specific thing,
Yeah, we can see the cursor.
or
We can
okay,
see the
fine.
cursor. Yeah.
Okay, fine. So I'll be talking about constraining how to constrain conformal field theories, and this is mostly based on this paper with NASBC and Tobias Hansen from Uppsala. So we know that the conformal field theories describe universal physics of scale invariant critical points. So they basically describe continuous phase transitions and are very important to develop a deep understanding of quantum field theory. So we will see as we go along how to constrain these theories using symmetries and some other consistency conditions. This is a brief outline of what I'll discuss today. So I'll start with a little bit of motivation of studying conformal field theories, mainly focusing on the ideas behind critical phenomena. So we would like to develop a framework to compute critical exponents. So I will introduce the basic concepts of CFTs that we need. Then I will move on to the main topic, which is how to use conformal symmetry efficiently to compute observables. Here by observables, I mean how to compute correlation function in a conformal field theory. So this is related to the idea of conformal bootstrap and dispersion relation in CFT. So after I set the stage for this, I will move on to discuss the application. So I will discuss how to use this dispersion relation in the context of Wilson-Fisher theory. And finally, I will conclude. So let's start with a canonical example of the phase diagram of water. This is the pressure temperature curve of water, and this is the critical point of water. Now, we know that a critical point is a point at the end of a phase equilibrium curve where a continuous phase transition occurs. A phase transition is a point in parameter space where the free energy becomes a non-analytic function of one of its parameter. So here, this is the pressure axis and this is the temperature axis, and we can measure various quantities near the critical point. For example, if you measure the specific heat of this system, it comes out to be of this form. So C is a specific heat and T is a temperature, Tc is the critical temperature, and it has this power law behavior. This alpha is a specific heat exponent. So there is a spike at the critical temperature Tc. Now let's move on to a different example. So this is the ferromagnetic paramagnetic phase transition. A similar phase transition occurs here. So, we consider a ferromagnet placed in an external magnetic field, and here the degrees of freedom are the individual spins that can point either up or down, and the tunable parameter is the temperature. So this is the ferromagnetic phase, and this is the critical temperature above which the ferromagnet becomes the paramagnet. So this is a ferropara phase transition. And here again, you can measure the critical, the specific heat, and it comes out to be a power law. Now, the critical exponents for specific heat are the same for water and magnetic system. So these are completely different systems made of completely different molecules. In one case, we have a bunch of water molecule And in other case, we have a bunch of spins pointing either up or down, although they have the same critical exponent. So microscopically different systems have the same critical exponent, and this is known as critical universality. Now the question is, why is it so? Why do we observe something which is universal? And the observables are the critical exponents that we measure, and we will see how to compute these observables of the critical exponents. So there is something which is known as a universality class, and one of the basic predictions of renormalization group flow is the universality. So RG flow shows that even if we start with different complicated systems at high energies, the behavior of two systems at large distances can be very similar if they have the same low energy degree of freedom. So for example, we have different systems in the ultraviolet or high energy, and they can move to the same theory in the IR. So the examples that we saw were of the boiling water and the magnetic system, and they are in the same universality class as the Ising model. So what it means is that studying any one of these will allow us to determine the critical exponent for the entire class. And this is the universality class. And the theoretical tool to study this universality class for this system is it's described by 5-4 theory, which I'll discuss now. Now, before I move on, let's focus on the 3D Ising model. So, Ising model can be studied by doing computations in any one of the microscopic realization as it is in the same universality class. So, for 1D Ising model, it was solved by Ernst Ising in 1925. The 2D Ising model was solved by Onsager in 1944. But no analytic solution for the 3D Ising model exists as of now. Now, conformal symmetry at the critical point can be used to gain insight for 3D Ising model. So the big question is, can the 3D Ising model at critical point yield an analytic solution? So what is the existing approach to study such systems? So it's studied by Wilson, Fisher, and co-group. So it's the Wilson-Fisher theory. So this is basically the theoretical tool. So here we have n scalar fields, or which we call this ON model. There are n scalar fields phi i's, and this is the action. This is the Lagrangian that we have, and this is the coupling. So this is like a 5 to the 4 coupling. So if there is only one scalar field, then this is lambda 5 to the 4 theory. And this theory is studied in 4 minus epsilon dimension. Now, it has a Wilson-Fisher fixed point, which means that the fixed point for the value, for a specific value of this coupling, if you compute the beta function of this theory, it vanishes. Now, vanishing of beta function implies that the theory is scale invariant or conformally invariant. So, this is what we will discuss now. So, this Wilson-Fisher theory for different values of n correspond to different physical systems. For example, if n is 1, which means that we have only one scalar field, and when epsilon is equal to 1, so you put epsilon equals 1 here, which means that basically we are studying the 3D Ising model. Now, similarly, for n equals 2 and epsilon equals 1, then this reduces to the superfluid helium model, and so on. Now, Wilson's approach is based on Feynman diagrams, so it's a perturbative approach. So, we study a theory in a perturbative expansion in epsilon. So, we compute all the observables. So, by observables, I mean the scaling dimensions of operator or the correlation function. We can compute all the observables as power series in epsilon and set epsilon equals 1 at the end. Here I just want to mention that this is apparently illegal because the series is divergent in this this is an asymptotic series in epsilon, but nevertheless we just keep doing this. So we use Callan-Simmons equation to determine the scaling dimension of the operators in the theory. So which is so this is the scaling dimension of the operator in a non-trivial theory, and this is given by the free theory, and in an interacting theory this receives a correction. So this correction we will call the anomalous dimension of the specific operator. Now the critical exponents in a specific theory are related to the scaling dimensions of the operators that we have in the theory. For example, if you have the correlation length exponent, so this measures how the two degrees of freedom are correlated in a given system, and this is measured by the exponent eta. This is given in terms of the operator, phi. So this is a dimension of the operator phi. So this is 2 delta phi minus d plus 2. And we also have the specific heat exponent. So this is the example that I showed in the first couple of slides. And this is given in terms of the operator phi squared. So it means that computing the critical exponent is equivalent to computing the operator dimension in a theory. So we compute the dimensions perturbatively in epsilon using Feynman diagrams and end up getting these values. So you see this is an expansion in epsilon, and this is how the correlation function looks. So these are the Feynman diagrams that we need in order to compute the epsilon expansion, the correlatory in epsilon expansion. So this is a 2-point function. So this is the 1 loop, this is a 2 loop, and so on. So you see that as we go higher in loop, the number of diagrams increase. And these are the higher loops. So this is the 4 loop and this is the 5 loop. So not only that the number of diagrams increase, but these are really complicated diagrams. So in order to compute the 5 loop correlator, you have to compute all these diagrams. So computing the operator dimensions in Wilson-Fisher theory involves many complicated Feynman diagrams, but most importantly, this approach does not make use of the enhanced conformal symmetry at the fixed point. And we know that the critical theory is conformally invariant and we should make use of that. So the question is, can conformal symmetry help? Now I will describe an alternative way of studying quantum field theory at the fixed point or the critical point without using the Lagrangian or Feynman diagram. So what is a conformal field theory? Conformal field theories are quantum field theories that are invariant under conformal symmetry, which includes these transformations. So this is the translation and this is the Lorentz transformation. So this is the same as the Poincare. And on top of that, if you have a conformal symmetry, we have scale invariance, which means that the system is invariant under a scaling transformation. So if you change x by a scale, it remains unchanged. And it also includes special conformal transformations. And these are the generator of these transformations. A conformal field theory is described by 2 sets of data. So one is a spectrum. It's specified by an infinite set of operators and specified by the dimension and spin of the operators. So delta is the dimension and L is the spin of this operator O, and this we will call the spectrum. And in conformal field theory, we also have the operator product expansion, which is very useful. It basically tells us how two operators interact. So you can write a product of two operators in a sum over an infinite number of operators. So this is operator at I and this is operator at j, and you can write it as an operator at a, and there is an infinite sum, and these are the coefficients that we have. And the important point here is that this sum is convergent. So this is the essence of conformal field theory. We have a convergent operator product expansion.
Sorry, Parijat, there is a question. So someone asked, how does one come up with the special conformal transformation?
Sorry, can you please repeat?
So someone had a question about how does one come up with the special conformal transformation?
Okay, so it basically consists of inversion and like translation. So if you just take some point and then you just invert it and then translate it, you will end up getting this. So this is basically some nonlinear transformation. Is basically involves square of x. Is it clear?
Yeah, maybe, okay, yeah, I think it's clear. I think we can move on.
Okay, so in conformal field theory, we are interested in computing correlation functions, and this is how a correlator looks. So we have operators at points x1, x2, and so on. So this is an n-point correlator of operators O. Now the power of conformal symmetry lies in the fact that it completely fixes the 2-point function and 3-point function. So if you take two operators at x1 and x2, the correlation function of this is completely fixed from conformal symmetry. This you can see, just first you assume that there is translational invariance, which implies that there is, it depends only on the difference between x1 and x2, and then you apply rotational invariance, which says that it has to be the magnitude, it has to depend only on the magnitude, and then you imply scale invariance, and on top of that, if you imply special conformal invariance, then only you get this. So that's why special conformal invariance is very important. So this is the form of the 2-point function, and you also have the 3-point function, which is also fixed. So you see that this is a fixed up by this functional dependence, but this number Cijk, this is not fixed. So this is the 3-point function is fixed only up to a number, and we will call this the OP coefficient. So we will call the dimension and the OP coefficient the CFT data. So the goal of any conformal field theory is to compute the CFT data. So if you can compute all the operator dimensions and the OP coefficients, you know the CFT, you can fix the CFT completely. Now, the 4-point function of in a CFT is not fixed from symmetry. The dynamical information is encoded in the 4-point function. So if you take 4 scalar operators inserted at point x1, x2, x3, and x4, the correlation function can be written in terms of conformally invariant cross ratios. So if you have 4 points, x1, x2, x3, x4, you can construct the cross ratios like this. So this is how you define, and these are conformally invariant, and you can just call it U or V or Z and Z bar. So these are basically 2 cross ratios. I will sometimes use UV and sometimes use Z and Z bar. So the 4-point function is fixed, and this is given in terms of this expansion. So as you can see that here, this is the there is a sum over delta and L. So this sums over the entire spectrum. This delta and L are the intermediate operators getting exchanged in any given process, and these G's are the conformal blocks. These are the function of cross ratios, and this C delta L, these are the OP coefficients. So actually the C's are not the OP coefficients, these are basically the square of OP coefficients. Now these conformal blocks are very important in any conformal field theory, and unfortunately the closed form expression in any dimension of these conformal blocks are not known, but some integral representation is known, and due to the work of Dolan and Osborne. Is there a question?
I think there's a question from Debangshu. He's asking if the sum in the formula of FZZ bar, is it only over primaries?
Yes. Yeah. The sum is only over primaries because the conformal block, it encodes the information of a primary and all of its descendants. So in the sum, we don't need to take care of the descendants separately. Yeah, is it clear?
So maybe this is a good point to ask if anyone has any questions. Okay. Okay, let's proceed.
So now these conformal blocks are, the closed form expression for the conformal blocks are known in some specific dimensions, in event dimensions, specifically in 2 dimensions and in 4 dimensions. But there is a recursion relation which you can use to compute the blocks in event dimension from the 4 and 2 from the 4 dimensional blocks actually. So now if we know the CFT data, that is at deltas and C delta L's, we can compute the correlator by resumming this. So just if you look into this expression, we know the functional dependence of the conformal blocks in terms of Z and Z bar, and these are the only unknowns, deltas and C delta L's. So if somebody gives you the data, you can just plug it in this expression and then you resum and compute the correlator. But the point is that it may not be always possible, even if you have the full CFT data, it may not be always possible to resum the correlator and obtain a closed form expression for the correlator. So, is it possible to obtain directly the correlator without the CFT data, without resumming? And another question that I will ask today is the following. So, is it possible to constrain a CFT with a smaller set of data? So, which means that is there a subset of the full CFT data that can fix the correlator unambiguously? So the answer is yes. So we will see that we will discuss now the dispersion relation in a conformal field theory that computes the correlator directly from the discontinuity. So by discontinuity, I mean if there is any, it could be anything, it could be fold, it could be some branch cut, any non-analytic behavior. So the usually dispersion relations enable us to construct a function from the knowledge of its discontinuity. So we will discuss it in the context of conformal field theory. Basically, we will discuss it in the context of 4 scalar correlator. And as we go along, we will see that in perturbative CFT, the correlator depends only on the spectrum of the theory. It depends mostly on the spectrum of the theory. And sometimes OP coefficients of certain low-lying operators with external dimensions below the composites of the external operator. This is for some specific cases. You can just forget about it for the time being, and you can just keep in mind that in perturbative CFT, the correlator is mostly fixed by the spectrum. So the example that we will see, it excludes this part. Now there are various techniques to compute the CFT data using the ideas of conformal bootstrap. So you can just use large string bootstrap. Sorry, is there a question? Is there a question?
Not on my end. Nirmalya, is there anyone?
No, there are no questions. Please go on.
So there is various techniques to compute the CFT data using the ideas of conformal bootstrap. And today we will not compute the CFT data. We will not compute the spectrum. We will use it as an input. So you can think of it like somebody gives you the spectrum, and then you are using it in the dispersion relation. So exploiting the analytic properties of the correlator, we will see that in perturbative settings that the correlator can be constructed unambiguously from the spectrum. So this is schematically what it means. So this is the input, which is a 2-point function. So this is a 2-point function, and by input I mean that I am using this delta as our input, and you plug it in the dispersion relation, and it pops out the 4-point function. So you just plug it in the 2-point function in the dispersion relation and end up getting the 4-point function using this. So this is the schematically the idea of the dispersion relation. So there is a question. Sorry. Now let's see how it goes. So if you have 4 scalar operators inserted at 4 points, x1, x2, x3 and x4, in this correlation function, you can fuse together operator 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, which is basically this is the S channel. So it means that the OP in the S channel, and this is how it looks. So you are summing over the operators getting exchanged in the S channel. And if OP is associative, you could have as well expanded this in the T channel, which is you fuse together 1 and 4 and then 2 and 3. And if OP is associative, these 2 expansions must be the same. And this is a non-perturbative statement. And there is another channel which is the U channel. So this is the equality of S channel, T channel and U channel. So this is a crossing symmetry that is very important, which we'll see now. So in terms of the conformal blocks, this is how it looks. So this is the 4-point function, and this is the S channel expansion. Now if you write the correlator in the T channel, it means that you are interchanging operator 1 and 3 and 2 and 4. So this means that you can change the variable. So you can go from S channel to T channel by changing the cross ratios Z to 1 minus Z and Z bar to 1 minus Z bar. And similarly, you can go from the S channel to the U channel by changing Z and Z bar to 1 over Z and 1 over Z bar. So this is the associativity and the crossing symmetry, which is the conformal bootstrap equation. This is the equality of the 3 channels. Now, this is a functional constraint on CFT data, and it must be satisfied for all values of the cross ratio Z and Z bar. So let's try to set up the dispersion relation. So what we do is the following. We introduce a pole at the generic point in the correlator and write the correlator as a residue of this pole. So if F, Z and Z bar is a correlator, we write this, we introduce a pole at a generic point Z and write it like this. So this is basically Cauchy's residue theorem, and we are exploiting the analyticity in only one variable Z. Z bar, we don't do anything, we keep it as it is. So this is a single variable stuff. Now, what is the analytic property of the correlator? Now, this correlator is given as a sum over conformal blocks. So the analytic properties of the correlator follows from analytic property of the conformal block. So in order to see the analytic structure of FZZ bar, we have to focus on the analytic structure of the conformal blocks. So as I already told you, the conformal block is known in some specific dimension. So this is a 4-dimensional conformal block. And this factorizes in Z and Z bar. In this K is a hypergeometric function times some exponent, which is Z power beta. So if you closely look into this form, we'll see that the conformal block in 4 dimension, it has 2 different structures in Z. So from this power, it has a power law dependence, which is Z power alpha, Z power beta. And from this sector, it has a hypergeometric function. Now this power law, so this has a discontinuity, or it has a branch cut for generic non-integer values of the exponent when Z is less than 0. So this picture depicts how the branch cut of the 4-dimensional conformal block look like. So there is a branch cut when Z is less than 0, originating purely from this power law. And there is also a branch cut from the hypergeometric function, which starts at 1 and it goes up to infinity. So these are the 2 branch cut structures. So you can see that if you just take this hypergeometric function, use the integral representation of this, then you will see that it has a branch cut structure from 1 to infinity. Now let us deform the contour to wrap around the branch cut over the real axis. So this small circle around Z, so this was our initial contour, and these are the cuts. Now you can deform this contour and end up getting this new contour. So there are these 2 sectors inserting the branch cuts, and then there is this arc contribution. So we have to see what is the arc contribution in this contour. So this arc is basically the contribution at Z equals infinity, and this is given by the U channel OTE. So you have this conformal block, you have this correlator, and you expand this in U channel. So this is the expansion. This is the expansion of the correlator in U channel, which is in powers of 1 over Z and 1 over Z bar. So this shows why it's important for the arc, because if you have, we are interested in the Z equals infinity behavior of the block. So if you expand this, you will see that this is how it looks. So it has this prefactor, and here we have all positive powers of 1 over Z and 1 over Z bar. So if we are focusing at Z equals infinity and there is a positive power of 1 over Z, we can forget about it because it will not contribute to the arc. So we are only interested in the negative powers of 1 over Z. So it means that only primaries for which this factor is negative or 0, it can contribute to the arc. It will have a Z power something positive. So is there any question? Okay.
I think there's a question from Pinaki.
Yeah, there's a question for Pinaki.
Yeah, so why do you have this delta L0? Does that mean you have always spin 0 that will contribute?
The first term is, yeah, I'm just separating out the first term, but here in the higher orders you can have all spins.
But those are 1 over Z suppressed, or those will
Yes.
also contribute.
Yes.
So those are suppressed.
So what I'm saying that in this 1 over z and 1 over z bar, you can have positive powers of z, which will be important. But if you have negative powers, hello?
Yes. And I'm saying that like all other higher spin will not contribute, or those are all
No, no,
suppressed.
no, no. Everything will contribute depending on the spectrum. So, because here you can have in any CFT, if you have something which violates, which satisfies this, then it can contribute.
But from this formula, it
Maybe,
looks
maybe
like,
it can be, maybe it will become the next slide, which
I see.
the higher spins are not suppressed. Probably it's a bad way of writing this. I think
Okay.
probably this is not a very good way. I can just.
Okay.
So in this expression, all the dimensions and all the spins are there. So what I'm trying to say is, what are the operators that can contribute at z equals infinity?
Sorry, Parijat, I just have a sort of continuation of Pinaki's question. So
Yes.
are you saying that if I have delta minus L is negative,
Yes.
right? Then the
Yes.
overall multiplier is ZZ bar to some positive number.
Yes.
Then if that multiplies a higher spin guy that's order 1 over Z, then you might
Yes.
get
Yes.
something that will still have a positive. Is that something?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
So so suppose you expand this block, and anything that you get which has a positive power of z, that will contribute to the R.
I see. Okay. Yeah, I think maybe this representation is a bit confusing.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. I think I should not have written it like this. So probably you can just think of it. You just expand it in any positive powers of z, in powers of z, and 1 over z and 1 over z bar. So yeah, I'm sorry for this confusion. This
No,
notation
it's cool.
is
It's cool.
Okay. So now the thing is that we know that in unitary CFT we have unitarity bound, which means that delta is greater than d minus 2 plus L for higher spin operators, and for scalars is greater than d minus 2 over 2, and delta is equal to 0 for identity. Now this clearly tells you, the first two lines clearly tells you that delta minus L, so if you just look into this expression, so these are the only operators that can contribute to the R. So the unitarity bound clearly tells us that in a unitary CFT there are no such operators other than the identity that contributes to the R because of this. So even though we have higher spin operators, they will not contribute to the R. And the only thing that can contribute is the identity operator. So in this expression, that's what I meant. This it should be the identity. But is it clear now?
Yes. Yes.
So this is true quite generally then, right?
Which one?
I mean, this statement that only the identity operator can contribute to the arc at infinity.
This is true for any unitary CFT. Yes.
Right.
Yes. So now we can calculate the contribution from the identity, which is very simple. So from the conformal block, this is just 1, and this is the R contribution that we get from the identity. You can just do it as just a one-line calculation. You just evaluate, you just put that delta equals to 0 in the block and end up getting this 1. So this is how the dispersion relation looks now. This is arc plus the discontinuity. So here by this of z prime, I mean that this function calculates the discontinuity of this correlator at z prime. So from this picture, you can see that there's discontinuity, it has two different types of discontinuities. And the discontinuity is defined to be the value of the function above and below the branch cut. So this is a basic definition of discontinuity. Now let's consider a simple example how the dispersion relation can be used. So this has nothing to do with CFT. This is just a simple dispersion relation which calculates the full function from the knowledge of its discontinuity. Suppose we have this function z power alpha, where alpha is something which is non-integer, and as I already discussed from the conformal block that it has a branch cut for any non-integer values of alpha when z is less than 0. Now using the definition of discontinuity, you can calculate the discontinuity when z is less than 0, and it comes out to be a phase times the same function. Now this is a very specific property of this power law function, whose discontinuity is remarkably simple. If you have some complicated function, you have to really calculate the discontinuity, and this may not be such simple. Now you just plug this discontinuity in the dispersion relation. So here the value of alpha you can choose such that the R contribution goes to 0. So if you plug it in this expression and you do this integral, you end up getting the same function. So this shows that the function can be reproduced only from the knowledge of its discontinuity. So now we'll discuss this in the context of CFT coordinator. So this is how the branch cut of the correlation function looks. And if you look into the individual blocks, so for each block, and if you focus on the discontinuity, which is coming from the z power alpha, this is simple. So this is just the same stuff that I discussed in the previous slide. So this picks up only a phase times the conformal block. So the discontinuity of a conformal block when z is less than 0 is a phase factor times the conformal block itself. Now this factor, this phase factor, is very important, as we will see now. So far we have been discussing the discontinuity when z is less than 0, but there is also another discontinuity when z is greater than 1, which originates from the hypergeometric function. At this level, we can use crossing symmetry to express this discontinuity coming from the hypergeometric function in terms of the simpler discontinuity. So the discontinuity of z greater than 1 of this correlator, you can just make a variable change. You can change z to 1 minus z and z bar to 1 minus z bar. And again, you can use crossing symmetry, which means basically f z bar is equal to f 1 minus z 1 minus z bar. Then you can recast this discontinuity greater than 1 at greater than 1, z greater than 1, in terms of the discontinuity and z less than 1 with this transformation. So this comes purely from crossing symmetry. So now again we plugged it in the dispersion relation. So we have this 1 from the arc. We have a discontinuity from minus infinity to 0, which is this. And for the discontinuity, which originates at 1 to infinity, we just use the same function and replace it by this variable change. So just if you look at this formula, it indicates that this is the only thing that you need to compute. This discontinuity at z less than 0 if you are using crossing. So let's consider the example of a 4-point correlator in mean field theory. So this means that the 4-point correlator is given as a sum over 2-point field contraction.
Parijat?
Yes.
I just wanted to pause here and ask if there are any questions from the audience. Any questions at all? Okay, doesn't look like it. Sorry, go on.
So this is the 4-point correlator, and the first line is what you get by summing over the weak contraction. You just have all 3 possible contractions, and if you check this factor out, you can write the correlator in terms of the cross ratio C and Z bar. So I am just taking this factor out because that's how I define the correlator. It's this times F. So this the term within the bracket is what I'm calling FZZ bar. Now we will see how how the presence of identity operator in the S channel can reproduce this correlator. So consider the S channel identity, which is delta equals 0, also L equals 0. So if you put this in this expression, this is just 1, and this is the only thing that you have for the S channel identity. And again, since this is a power law, the discontinuity is very simple, and the discontinuity is given by this phase factor. You note that this Z bar is just not doing anything, it's just as it is. So you plug it in the dispersion relation and you end up getting this. So,
Sorry, Parijat, I have a question.
yes.
You're focusing a lot on the discontinuity contributions of this ZZ bar in the that's coming in F, right?
Yes.
I'm just this conformal block itself doesn't. Oh, you're saying that that's just the hypergeometric function.
Yes, the conformal blocks have the discontinuity in Z.
Which is given by the hypergeometric function.
No, it has both actually.
It has both. Yes. Okay.
Yeah. So it has a power law and it has a hypergeometric function, but there is no overlap. The branch cars don't overlap. So the power law discontinuity is only when Z is less than 0, and the hypergeometric function discontinuity is only when Z is greater than 1.
Okay. All right. Got it.
And since we are using the crossing symmetry, we can just forget about the hypergeometric function discontinuity. So from this expression, you can compute the discontinuity just from this power law.
Okay. Thanks.
So if you plug it in the dispersion relation, you end up getting this integral. So this is what we computed, which is this, and from crossing, this is what we have. So this is basically the discontinuity which is coming from the hypergeometric function, but we didn't compute it directly. So as you see that this reproduces the mean field theory correlator nicely. Now, what about the OPE data? So the dispersion relation computes the correlator directly, and if you want to compute the OPE data, you have to decompose it in conformal blocks. So this is the correlator, and this is how you decompose. So this one is the contribution coming from the identity, and these are the other operators. Now we know the expansion of this, and we can compare the left hand side and the right hand side in small ZZ bar, and we can actually compute this. So this is a indirect way of computing the OPE data. You just first compute the correlation function, and then you decompose it in conformal blocks, and then you end up getting the OPE. So that's all for the mean field theory. Now let's move on to perturbative CFT. How do we compute correlator in perturbative CFT? So we expand the operator dimension and OPE coefficient in a series in the perturbative parameter. So here you can think of this G as a perturbative expansion parameter, and these are the operators, the intermediate primary operators that are getting exchanged. So these are the anomalous dimensions at each order in perturbation theory. This superscript indicates the order of the anomalous dimension, and you can similarly expand this OPE coefficients in a series. Now this basically means that the sum over delta and L is mapped to a sum over N and L. So the higher you go in N, it means that the higher dimensional operators, all the other higher operators can contribute. So here also, if you use these two expansions, you can expand the correlator in a series in G. Now you remember that this is the discontinuity of a single conformal block when Z less than 0. Now if you look into the phase factor, this one, and here these deltas are given by this. If you plug it in this expression and expand this factor in G, you'll see that this 1 gets cancelled by the 1 which comes from the exponential. And this factor within the bracket, it starts at order G. So it automatically takes you to a next order in perturbation theory. So this is roughly what this G is, so that Madhu was asking. So it has this branch cut which is coming from this power law, and this is the hypergeometric function which is regular when Z is less than 0. Now from this expression, you see that F1, the correlator at order G, it depends only on this gamma 1 because of this phase factor. Now, is this clear?
Yeah.
Okay, so you see that the discontinuity of the correlator at C less than 0 is completely determined by the spectrum at this order, which is gamma 1, but not at the OP, or on the OP at that particular order. So there it doesn't depend on A1, but it depends on the OP of the previous order and the anomalous dimension at that particular order. And since this discontinuity determines the correlator via the dispersion relation, it follows that the 4-point correlator is entirely determined by the spectrum of the CFT. Let's apply this to compute the correlation function in Wilson-Fisher theory. So this is the 4-point correlator. So this is the first order G term, which is basically the contact diagram, and the next two diagrams are the order G square term. This is a typo. So now we'll see how to compute this order G diagram from the dispersion relation. So we use the dimension of which we have in the Wilson-Fisher theory as our input. So it has an expansion in epsilon. So we expand everything in epsilon and the dimension in 4 minus epsilon. So this is a scalar operator that we have, and these are the highest spin operators. Now if you look into these two dimensions, you will see that at order epsilon, only this scalar operator receives a correction. The highest spin operator receives a correction at order epsilon square. So at first order, the correlation function is extremely simple, and it's given only in terms of this spectrum. So you plug it in this expression. So there is no sum over n and n, and only L equals to 0 contributes. And this is how it looks. And from the conformal block, you get this log dependence. And you plug it in the dispersion relation and do the integrals, and you end up getting this. So this is how the correlation function at order G can be reproduced. So you see that the correlation function, only the delta equals 2 scalar operator contributes to this diagram. Now the correlator at next order can also be computed, and here we will have all these spinning operators, because at order epsilon square we have L equals 0 and L greater than 0 as well. So we have to do this sum over L. But even then we don't have n equals, we don't have the sum over n. So this is the input in Wilson-Fisher theory, and up to order epsilon square, only n equals 0 contribute. So you can repeat the same step and end up getting this correlated, the closed form expression of this correlated. So I have not written the explicit form, but this is what you get from this. And it computes the correlated.
There's a question from Pinaki.
Yes.
Hi. So you are working for, this is in 4 minus epsilon dimension, right? This
Yes. Yes.
pressure.
Yes.
But is it non-unitary?
Yes, it is. But the operator, yeah, that's a very dicey question. I don't know the answer. The theory is non-unitary, yes, but the operator dimensions that we have, they all satisfy the unitarity bound.
I see. Oh, so unitary bound is important, but okay.
Yes.
Nice. Thanks.
So let me summarize. So using the dispersion relation, you can compute the correlator order by order in any perturbative parameter, and you can use the dimensions as your input. So for the first order correlator, you just need the identity, which is this, and you end up getting this F0, and from that you can extract the OP coefficient, the order 0 OP coefficient. And at next order, you use this order 0 OP coefficient and order 1 dimension as your input, and you compute F1. This you can further decompose and end up getting these A1s and so on. So this is schematically how it works. So as of now, we have been able to compute this F2. If you go to higher orders in F, there is some resummation that you need to do, because all the non-zero n operators contribute, and that sum we haven't been able to do. But this is roughly the idea. So we have shown how to use conformal symmetry at the fixed point to study the critical behavior of the system. So this is a Lagrangian free approach, and this bypasses the Feynman diagram computation. So we have not used any Feynman diagrams in computing the correlated. Now this dispersion relation computes the correlated directly in a perturbative CFT from its discontinuity. But as of now, we don't have any non-perturbative example, but it would be interesting to apply it to any non-perturbative CFT and see how it works, because the dispersion formula that we have, that is completely non-perturbative. And eventually the goal will be to make this a framework to study quantum field theory at critical point in a Lagrangian free approach. So I think I should stop now. Thank you.
Shit, how do we end talks now? I think,
You clap
yeah,
first.
yeah, okay, clap. This sounds really lame. Like, there's a clap emoji.
Oh, there is a clap sign.
Okay, I think we're doing pretty good on time, in the sense that the hour is just up. So yeah, I just had one question about the recording. So I'm still recording, but should we stop now and then just kind of discuss stuff, or what? How do you want to do it?
Maybe it's good to record the discussion session also. Just
Oh, okay.
yeah.
Cool. So please feel free to unmute yourselves and ask Parijat questions. Yeah, Nitin has a question. Nitin, go ahead.
go there.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, is this Nitin?
Yeah, this is Nitin.
Hi.
So
you go ahead.
I have a question from slide 16. Yeah. Yeah, thank you. So here you have a 3-point correlator, right? So I recall hearing somewhere that all these odd point correlators are basically zero because of some Cobo-Martin-Schwinger condition. Could you make some comment here?
What? Can you please repeat all these odd points?
I recall hearing it somewhere. Maybe it's not applicable to this particular context, but it was like there is a condition called Cobo-Martin-Schwinger condition, and it forbids all, it basically makes all the odd point correlators as zero.
What is the condition? I don't know of it. Can you please explain?
No. I don't have too much idea about it, so I was just asking whether it's applicable here or have you considered that or not. So that's it. Okay.
In a general safety, this is in general non-zero for any three generic operators.
Okay.
Maybe
Thank you.
what you are saying is valid for a thermal CFT. Usually this
Yeah, pretty much.
Cobo-Martin-Schwinger, this is not, this my impression is a zero temperature CFT. So
Yes, this is.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Hello.
Now, Pinak, here's a question.
Yeah. So next slide, you had something to say about this thing, right? This correlators mostly depend on deltas, but not on CIJs. So can you elaborate?
Yes.
Why is that?
You mean in this slide? What do you mean by next slide? I mean, or is
Yes,
it a general question?
No, you have some point you said that.
Yes, yeah. Just.
So why is that?
Yes, I'll just explain.
Yeah, this one I think.
Yes. So the thing is that if you just look into the correlator, so yes. So can you see the slide?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the thing is that here the discontinuity at z less than 0 it's proportional to this phase factor, right? And it starts at order g because of this operator. But there could be some cases where there are this factor is not vanishing. For example, if you just consider a case where this doesn't apply. Like what I'm saying, suppose the dimension of the external, the dimension of the operator getting exchanged, if this is less than the value of the external correlator, then this thing, it can start at order 1. Okay, maybe let's see. Just have some backup slide probably. Yes, yeah. Can you see this?
Yes.
Okay, so the thing is that what I said, so the phase factor, can be 0 if the exponential part is 1. So for example, if you have, what is going on here? Is somebody writing something? Sorry.
Who's writing on the screen? How is this happening?
Yeah. I thought I did something.
Yeah, someone is doing it.
Okay, so the thing is that if you remember that the phase factor, it is proportional. Just sorry, it's not good. Yeah, if you just look into this expression, you can just forget about this z bar. So if this delta phi is an integer, which means that if these are poles, like if we have terms like 1 over z, 1 over z squared, something like that, then this phase factor is 0, right? Because this is 1. If this delta phi is exactly integer, then it means that
I understand. So next order will be important. So it's not leading.
yes, yeah, that's true.
Okay.
So then the discontinuity still holds, because if you have some poles, then the discontinuity is like the delta function. But here, the advantage, we were just going to the next order, that doesn't hold true. If the operator dimension, if the dimension is such that this full thing is an integer. For example, like, can I write some? Is there a way to write? Okay, but
Yeah, I understand that. It's like you are saying that if delta phi is equals to that
yeah.
thing, some
So
integer.
yes, exactly. If delta minus L, if in this line, if delta minus L is 2 delta phi minus some integer, then this will not happen. Then this will not start at order 0. Then we have to take care of the order 1 OP coefficient. Then that will be important. Is it clear? Hello? Hello?
Pinaki?
Pinaki?
Okay, I don't know what happened to Pinaki. Okay, are there any other questions?
Yeah, Parijat, you said you need less data to constrain the CFT. Can you comment on that?
Yes, so it means basically usually the CFT data are this deltas and C's, right? Yeah, so this is the CFT data. So you need the spectrum and the OP coefficient, right?
Yes.
But what I am saying is that if you are using the dispersion relation, then since the discontinuity in any perturbative CFT, so the discontinuity is fixed only from the spectrum, but not from the OP.
Okay.
So this is a subset of the full data, which can fix the correlator.
Okay. Any other questions, comments?
Sorry, I just wanted to just this is kind of vague, but so the input for this dispersion relation technique that you guys have developed, is the CFT data, and you're also using what else are you using? You're using crossing.
So CFT data is not the input, only the spectrum is the input.
Spectrum. Sorry, not all the data, just the spectrum.
Yeah.
That's it.
Crossing and crossing.
And crossing symmetry. And okay. And you use that to determine the you use that to determine the analytic structure of the correlation function.
No, we actually computed the correlation function. The analytic structure of the correlation function it actually follows from the conformal block, because
Oh, it follows from the conformal block. Okay.
yes. So since the correlator is a sum of this conformal block, and we know the conformal block, this structure is what we don't know is the dimension and the
I see. I wanted to ask, it's sort of because Shubham has been working on these scattering amplitudes. Shubham, are you there?
Yes.
Damn it! I thought I was going to catch him unawares. So in when we compute scattering amplitudes, right? Like one of the we're interested, of course, in computing scattering amplitudes, and there are dispersion relation like techniques for computing form factors and stuff like that.
Yes.
But over there, one of the limitations is that we don't know what the analytic structure or a general characterization of the analytic structure at loops. Is that right?
Yes. Hello? Yes.
Yeah, sorry, I wasn't going anywhere in particular with this. I was just.
No, I think up to one loop, Beyond one loop, we don't know.
I see. At one loop, it is known.
Yeah, it's just that it can have a branch cut. That's it. Poles and branch cuts. But beyond that, we don't know. There are
Yes.
Li2 and all those kind of factors.
I see.
Actually, these Li kind of factors appear here also, if I'm not wrong, right, Parijat?
Yes, yeah.
The techniques are actually same.
Techniques are actually, this is actually like, the dispersion relation that has been what one uses in scattering amplitudes, that has been modified for CFTs. Like, that's it. Like, otherwise you have this sort of thing in scattering amplitudes also.
Yes, yeah.
Mathematically, this is the same problem, right?
Same.
Yeah.
Kramers-Kronig relations.
Yeah.
These are
Exactly.
Kramers-Kronig.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but here the advantage is that we have crossing and we have
Exactly. So you can one of the branch cuts you can convert using crossing symmetry into just the other one, which is easier.
Exactly.
Yeah, so just like this 2f1 to the power z to the power something, right? This 0 to 1.
Yes,
Yeah.
So hello.
I think Subbu has a question.
Yeah, but Pinaki, you can continue.
Yeah, if you have a question, go ahead.
Okay. So I also have a vague question. So this unitarity bound, how important was it in the sense that will some technical details change, and if there is some technique that would still work, or for this dispersion relation technique to work, the bound is important?
Okay, so the unitarity bound is important in the sense that here we are actually evaluating the contribution from the arc from this unitarity bound.
Right.
Because this, so this shows that only one operator contributes to the arc at infinity. But in principle, you can, like, if this bound is not satisfied, then you can just modify the arc contribution and just add it. It may so happen that there are other operators that contribute. So the thing is that you have to see the arc contribution. Even without the unitarity bound, you can write the dispersion relation. This is a mathematical statement. So this is valid for any function. You just have to.
Maybe unitarity bound helps you in getting some universal relation, that for all theories which satisfy this unitarity bound, identity operator is the only one which contributes to arc getting. So otherwise, given a particular theory, even if it does not satisfy this bound, we can just take into account all the operators which contribute to arc at infinity and proceed, right?
Yeah, but the point is that then if there are infinite number of operators that contribute to the arc, then you have to see that whether the dispersion relation is useful or not. Because the goal is to compute the correlation function in a similar way. But if you are actually, you have an infinite contribution to the arc, then you have to analyze all the contributions and see how it works. It depends very specifically on a particular theory. But in principle, you can go ahead even without the immediate bound.
I have a question. Like, so you mentioned something in the conclusion about non-perturbative effects that you guys are trying to see. So, what non-perturbative stuff?
We don't know. I don't have any answer to your question. But what I meant is that the dispersion formula that we have is for any CFT. But the example that I discussed, that is only for the perturbative CFT, right?
Right.
So it would be good to see if there is any non-perturbative example, any non-perturbative CFT. I don't know what CFT it is.
Yeah.
But if it exists, then how difficult or easy it is.
Yeah, so I was going to ask the similar questions, like where exactly you use this perturbative nature in the epsilon expansion, right?
Yes,
Yes. Because the thing is that the phase factor.
I mean, how important that is? Like, it's some just technical thing, or I mean, in principle, you can.
In principle, you can do whatever you want. You can have, if you can do the non-perturbative sum over the dimensions over the conformal block, then it's fine.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So just like Bootstrap, in Bootstrap also you need some 1 over n or some epsilon.
Yes, exactly.
In principle, you can do it non-perturbatively.
That's true. Yeah. But as of now, I don't know any non-perturbative example which I can just tell you.
Yeah. If there is some theory without any such parameters, I don't know, then probably it will be nice.
Yes, yeah. But the point is that also we have these conformal blocks, so we have to see whether the conformal blocks are known, because the form is not known in any dimension. In odd dimension, it's not known.
Yeah, that's true. But what about this 6D2,0? Some supersymmetric guy can say.
Yeah, I don't know.
Shubham, do you have any comment on this 2,0 theories?
No. No. These are way beyond my pay grade.
So I have a question. It's not really a question. It's kind of a vague thought. But you know how? So this is a sort of general technique in the sense that it would be applicable to two-dimensional conformal field theories as well.
Yes. Yeah.
Right, because you're just writing down the input and all this, and so we know the minimal models quite well. And like a lot of things are known about minimal models. So I was just wondering, like, if these techniques can be used to kind of like show some nice things about minimal models in a nice way, or this is kind of vaguely what I had in mind. But I mean, I don't know if it will be particularly interesting because there are other techniques to derive those things. But this looks incredibly simple, is what I meant. You just take the spectrum. So
yes, yeah, that's a very good question, because in minimal models in 2D CFT also the conformal blocks are known.
Then you have only global block, right?
No, you are like, it depends on what exactly are you considering. You can also have Virasoro blocks.
Yeah, but that's known in only some regime or something, right? It's not. These are like explicitly known for, like.
Yeah, you mean the closed form expression for the conformal block, right?
Yeah. So you are using
Yeah,
the
yeah,
form of the block, right? Sum2 form.
yes, yes. So what I'm trying to say is that even if you don't know the closed form expression for the conformal block, you can derive the analytic structure of the conformal block. So here also we are using this 4 minus epsilon expansion. So the conformal block is known in 4 dimension, but we are deviating from 4 dimension. But
Yes.
the thing is that using the integral representation of the block, you can check the analytic structure of the block. So that's the most important thing, right? So the first thing is that you have to focus on the branch cuts. That for that you don't need to know the closed form. You can say it like from some other way actually. That's what we did. But like what we saw that in event dimension, the analytic structure of the conformal block is the same as the 4-dimensional block.
What about the unitarity? Then it's not. It's just d minus 2 by 2, right?
Yeah, there is no gap.
Yeah. So that shouldn't that.
Yeah, so the thing is that if this, like here the thing is simple because we have only one operator like the identity which
Exactly.
contributes to the R. But if you, I think this goes back to the question that was asked. So if you have an infinite number of operators, so then the art contribution can be complicated.
Yeah. So in 2 dimension there is no gap, right? So all the
No
people
gap,
can
yes.
Exactly.
squeeze.
This is
Yeah.
problem with large spin bootstrap also.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, you cannot organize the twist sectors
Yeah.
in blocks. Yeah.
Sorry, but for minimal models, like we know, I mean, I don't know. I'm just thinking. Yeah, maybe we can talk a little more some other time. But I just had in mind that.
Yeah, it actually depends on what you are interested in. What
Yeah,
I mean.
I understand.
But of course, analytic structure is definitely the same because the thing that you get using this what do you call this null state, the differential equation you get, that's hypergeometry, right? That's
Yes.
has 3 singular points, 0, 1, and infinity. So
Yes.
definitely there's some same singularity structure, that for sure. But yeah,
Yes.
technically I'm not sure how.
Yeah, so the point is whether you gain any advantage or not. So you can write the dispersion relation for anything, any theory, but
So here the great thing was that you just need identity operator contribution in the
yes,
boundary.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, we always
That,
do this integral, this kind of integral when that vanishes or that simplifies, right? The boundary.
yes. Yeah, that's true. Or if you are lucky and you have some specific CFG where you have some few, I mean, finite number of operators that contribute to the art.
That's usually rare, either one or
Yeah,
infinite.
that's true. Yeah, usually we are not that lucky.
Okay, are there any other questions? Okay, so if there are no more questions, then let's all thank Parijat by a moment of silence. I don't know.
Maybe unmute for
Unmute, everyone unmute, yeah.
15 seconds and clap.
Thank you.
Okay, so thanks a lot, Parijat. It's a great talk, and so we'll Nirmali and I will get in touch with all of you on Slack regarding where this lecture will be uploaded and so on. We do need volunteers for next week, so I'm gonna stay silent for about 30 seconds, and I expect one of you to please step forward and volunteer to speak.
Madhu, can you or Subranil speak about this TT bar deformation paper?
I think Shubranil is busy next week because he's got this conference that he is speaking
black
at.
hole microstructure.
Yeah.
First intensity, I know. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to speak at some point. Of course, I just don't want it to be like the second talk in the series. So, like, maybe someone else can volunteer, and maybe further down in the series, I'll be happy to talk about that. Yeah. Anyone? Guys, this is getting awkward.
So my Mac is broken, so I cannot do anything.
I'm just going to read out names. So Manu is first, alphabetically.
Yeah, no, man.
You said no.
What about Arnab? How about Arnab? Arnab, are you there?
Yeah, I am here.
Why don't you give a talk?
I can talk sometime later, not immediately.
Like next week will be good. No, I think maybe why not?
I'll talk sometime later. I mean, towards the end of this month or something like that.
Okay, fine. How about next to next week?
Actually, yeah, next to next week is what date?
Hold on.
I think Arnav also has this ICTS talk, no?
Yeah. I mean, that's what. So that is also next to next week.
Next to next week is 17th.
Yeah, 17th I have a talk in ICTS.
Okay. Great. 24th?
Yeah, so basically the same talk I can give, if that is okay.
You can present your work with Ashok, right?
Okay. Fine.
Yeah. Because this talk, I guess ICTS, everyone will attend anyway. Does that sound okay?
Okay. Yeah, 24th should be fine.
Okay, what about Arun now? Would you like to give the talk next week?
I'm actually still preparing for the ST4 lecture, so I'll be able to give after this month, or in July I can speak sometime.
Okay, maybe we'll decide in Slack then.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Cool. So let me just stop recording.